what we're going to take a look at now is airports and infrastructure. We've got some great panelists from airports and also from some energy companies and infrastructure companies, and we've got the right man for the job in terms of moderating this panel. So ZeroAvia VP Infrastructure Arnab Chatterjee joins us. Arnab heads up our infrastructure team, as mentioned, and prior to joining ZeroAvia, he spent a decade with Shell working on low carbon fuels and hydrogen in particular. So I'll hand over to Arnab to introduce the panelists. And Arnab, we have a little bit of extra time at the end, so we can run on probably 5 or 10 minutes past the scheduled stop time, so we can try and catch up a little bit on lost time. So if you don't mind, take it away.
Thanks very much. I hope you can all hear me, and appreciate the opportunity to share this great panel with the Hydrogen Aviation Summit here with ZeroAvia. So let me introduce who we've got. Brian Mcclean, firstly, is the Director of Communication and Sustainability at AGS, Aberdeen, Glasgow and Southampton Airport. He has spent nearly 12 years at Glasgow Airport in a variety of policy roles, and would like to welcome him onto stage, please.
Hi, thanks, Arnab, and good evening, everybody.
Let me introduce the next panelist here. Jesse Schneider is the CEO and the CTO at ZevStation. Jesse founded ZevStation, the Californian company building out electric charging and hydrogen refueling stations in California after leaving Nikola Motors, where he had been instrumental in leading the fuel cell and hydrogen engineering teams for the hydrogen station and the Nikola tray. Jesse boasts nearly 25 years of experience spearheading fuel cells and electrification in companies such as BMW and Daimler, as well as leading international standards for hydrogen refueling. Welcome on stage. The next panelist is Ahmad Bakkar. Yeah. Ahmad is the strategy lead at Rotterdam, the Hague Airport. Ahmad leads strategy, innovation and new business at Rotterdam, the Hague Airport. And he has had a very long career working in aviation with the Netherlands National Aerospace Centre, Shell, and Fokker, amongst other roles. Welcome. And
thank you very much.
We've got Myron Keehn. Myron is currently the CEO in waiting at Edmonton International Airport, currently the Vice President, and will ascend to this top job as of January the 1st. Over the last 9 years, Myron has attracted over 1.5 billion Canadian dollars of investment into Edmonton airports, as well as positioning the airport as a global leader in ESG and innovation. He's been part of the team at Edmonton for the last 15 years, following a decade with Vancouver Airport Authority. Myron, welcome.
Thank you, Arnab. Hello, everyone.
So thank you all for joining again. May I start, Jesse, with a couple of lines from you to explain a little bit about yourself and ZevStation and some of the interesting work that you're doing?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you again for the invitation to attend this really interesting forum on aviation with ZeroAvia. So ZevStation is a startup. We're in Palm Springs, California. We have some charging stations existing now and a small fleet trial with FedEx ISPs. But the purpose of ZevStation in the beginning was ground vehicles, both hydrogen and charging at one site. Earlier this year, I had a discussion with Val Miftikoff, the CEO of ZeroAvia, and we spoke about maybe potentially sharing some of the hydrogen that we're going to be creating here in Palm Springs and other places, and talk about a demonstration, talk about ecosystems, and also met with Arnab as well. Arnab is the key person on the hydrogen side, certainly. ZevStation is intending to make stations off the highway, and we also like to couple with a station that is not too far away from airport, and where there's an opportunities to share at scale. Earlier this year as well, I was asked to chair a group called H2 Aero, so Hydrogen Aerospace at the airport, where we've created a white paper. And there's an opportunity to show you a preview of what's about to be published in a 5-minute short segment, and also show you that some of that is already morphed into an SAE standard. That hopefully it's possible to do that now. Thank you. So Arnab, is that possible to segue into a presentation, or what did you want to do with the...
Yeah, no, please do. Please do. Are you able to share your screen with the presentation?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I can do that.
Fantastic.
Bear with me a second as I try to make this without fumbling. Sorry if I do this. Let me, if I share this screen and do this. Okay, so this is meant to be a short presentation to bring you into a consortium for hydrogen at the airport, and who has actually put together a white paper that's going to be published in the public domain in the near future. And it's with an actual example. We worked with the airport of Long Beach, for instance, and with the purpose of creating a cookbook for what are the needs of creating hydrogen at the airport, and also some guidance for demonstration projects for hydrogen fuel cells, etc. as well. Just to mention, like I said, it's a short presentation. Certainly, there's a lot of detail in here. You know, this white paper is a further work of some of the ATIs. So we actually have pulled in some of the team members of the Fly Zero, where they focused on a much larger airport, the London Heathrow, and we focused on a very small airport, which is Long Beach, because we think that's a place to start. But we think there are policy needs that are certainly the same, small or large, private airspace. There are gaps in codes and standards. And there's a need for hydrogen. This demonstration of this new technology at the airport, as well as an understanding of this multimodal effort, because there's an opportunity when you get to hydrogen at scale and make a hub next to an airport to supply hydrogen for the aircraft, but also for the ground support equipment, and also for the surrounding cars and trucks that are coming in as well. So that's really covered in this. And this is meant to spark a public-private partnership in research in this area. I just wanted to mention that this is a work of some major, plane makers and also a number of startups in this area, both in hydrogen and in aerospace. Certainly, you see a lot of familiar names, but the idea is that there's a structure here that covers the hydrogen fuel and hydrogen aircraft, with a great cross-section of the industry, with policy. And also, as I mentioned, we at least involve one airport. Certainly, there's an opportunity to involve other airports as well. What needs to be understood with hydrogen aerospace is that it's 100 to 1,000 times more than ground vehicle hydrogen storage on board. And the spectrum is really shown here. And this is the classes of hydrogen fueling that we're imagining. And probably in terms of time frame, it's about the same as well, right? Where you have opportunities to electrify, but also opportunities to put hydrogen on some of the smaller small aircraft, whether it be an e-rotor or utility. But certainly, as you go up in this value chain, we're talking about from 100 kilograms to 1,000 and a few thousand, all the way up to 10,000. Excuse me. Sorry about that. With that said, I want to mention that this hydrogen airport will have to encompass hydrogen fueling of all of this, which is something that is significantly larger than hydrogen fueling today. I want to show you, this is just a vision, just to show you all the segments that need to happen. Not all this has to happen at the airport, certainly, but it needs to be understood, and that's the reason for this vision, that there will be a need for a very large scale production in order to satisfy this hydrogen, either on-site or off-site, that needs to be trucked over or with a pipeline over to the airport. And there's an opportunity to fuel small aircraft with gaseous hydrogen, but also small or ground vehicles. But as soon as you go up in mass, it's really clear liquid hydrogen is the future, and you need to have a large storage of that. And certainly that's what's depicted here. And there's an opportunity, certainly we've seen recently, even this week, that there are thoughts of having a stationary station for liquid hydrogen, but there will be certainly a need to bring fuel out to the tarmac, very similar today. So this is just a vision showing the whole scope of the paper. And without going into too much detail, I just wanted to show that it's really important to understand that when you put all the segments together and understand how much fuel is needed, you know, this is just showing just an example of a 60-ton-a-day airport. What needs to be understood is most of that is for the aerospace. If you want to cover a small airport of Long Beach, we calculated it out per 1 day, it's about 60 tons a day. 50 tons a day go to the aerospace, 50 tons, so most of it. But there's, you know, the other part is heavy duty trucks and some of the light duty vehicles that come by. What's really interesting here is that we can, since ground vehicle is already electrifying, is already going towards hydrogen, maybe we could start with a station like that at the airport and then expand inside the airport. And that's something that this group has put together. And I can mention that some industry members, including ZeroAvia and others, are putting together a consortium to do that in California as well. So this is a white paper that's actually certainly being used by the industry. And what I wanted to mention just as a closing slide, that what's starting next year is that some of the content of this white paper is being published this year. And also some of this team is coming together in standardization to bring, so it's not just a white paper that is being published. I wanted just to bring to you, this is actually the first time it's been mentioned publicly. SAE is looking to standardize hydrogen fueling at the airport based on some of the great work in the ground vehicle that could probably be used to quickly accelerate gaseous fueling, which is just depicted. Certainly this is an illustration with an e-rotor, and certainly you've seen pictures of ZeroAvia and ZeroStation also with, you know, with a hydrogen fueler. It's possible to do small aircraft with gaseous. The larger aircraft would be something that would be liquid hydrogen. You have to bring that out to the tarmac and fuel that. And there should certainly, this has to be done safely, but it also has to be done in a short amount of time. And the concept is to start the standardization of this. And this is only meant to give confidence to those, especially airports, for safety, and also for other areas, for the aircraft makers, and also for the hydrogen industry, to get together and make sure that it's done safely and done quickly, so you don't have to sacrifice your present operations for this new technology.
Yes, let me interrupt here, just knowing that we've hit overtime, and it'd be good to, so thank you very much. It was a very good detailed,
that was it last slide.
Exhaustive discussion. Please go and look at that H2RO paper as it comes through. But now let's move over, please, to Ahmad, who has some excellent experiences we've discussed. Ahmad, I'm grateful if you might share some of your thoughts on Rotterdam airport, as well as the general ecosystem around Rotterdam, and how you see this innovation kind of taking place. Let's do that.
Is that better now? Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay, so it's working. Yeah, so I thank you very much for having me. So as a part of the Royal Schiphol Group, and as a part of as an important regional airport in the Netherlands, we are basically looking into the future, and we are trying to make the future happen today. The idea is that we have a big challenge, as I've mentioned before, as everybody knows, and leading this transformation requires us to make sure that we are able to facilitate any newcomer coming in with innovative ways of thrust of propulsion. Hydrogen is one of the feasible or of one of the let's say most realistic transformative propulsion system, and we want to be a part of this. So we as an airport want to make sure that we have the right infrastructure, we have the right development in place, the right concept of operations, and the procedures from a safety perspective, but also from a supply chain perspective, to allow this transformation. And therefore, we are working on developing a hydrogen aviation hub. I have heard this word many times today, so it's a good thing. Many other colleagues and panelists are working on this, which is great. And our plan is basically to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place by following up on a step plan. So we want to fly on gas hydrogen, we want to fly on liquid hydrogen, and we want to have the right procedures in place to be able to do that. So that when the market is ready and when airlines are ready to basically use these aircraft, they can actually come and land here. So that's on one aspect. In order to do that, we eventually want to do it on green hydrogen. But at the moment, resources and competition when it comes to green hydrogen is basically fierce in the market. And in order to be able to bend the curve, in order to be able to bend the innovation curve, we are also looking into the feasibility of having and making hydrogen on site. So we have a solar park along our runway. We have our buildings full of solar panels. And what we're trying to do is to look into the feasibility of building an electrolyzer to be able to feed the airport with the preliminary hydrogen capability. So eventually this will not be enough for the demand. We are looking into a longer scale, but in order to bend the curve on the shorter term, this is one of the developments we're looking at as well.
Thank you, Ahmed. That's an excellent, fascinating discussion. Maybe if I could move to Myron, and I know that we're moving a little bit over time, so grateful if we might keep the discussion to the core section around questions. There'll be plenty of time to discuss those options.
Sure. Thank you again. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and really valuable to participate. Great to hear that everyone's focusing on the hub, and airports are great places to hub. Really quick, Canada has a hydrogen strategy where it's like every country does, and then Alberta, our province that I'm in, which is one province from the west coast over, has a hydrogen strategy. And what we've done is our region came together and formed Canada's first hydrogen hub. We account for about 60% of all the hydrogen manufactured in Canada today, and about $17 billion of just announced investments over the last 12 months in hydrogen production, for everything from making polypropylene pellets with full net zero, the first one in the world, to large-scale green and blue hydrogen production. So the airport created a hydrogen strategy, and as was presented earlier, as Jesse showed, the ground vehicles are a piece of it, but it's really the aircraft that are going to drive the demand for hydrogen and bring the cost down. So our goal is to democratize hydrogen and make it equivalent to or lower than diesel. And so based on what was already been said here by Arnab and others, we as well are focused on how do we drive the demand in the aviation side and working with ZeroAvia to do that, and others. Really, as Brian said in the last panel from Brussels, our airport's perfectly sized because we have so many flights under 2,000 nautical miles and a lot within the 800 nautical mile range, which is a perfect location for those flights, those short, call it shorter haul, but really important flights, because we will never be replaced by a train. These are communities that have 400, 500, 600 kilometers with nothing but forest in between, or muskeg, or places that you can't actually build, or Rocky Mountains. Train lines are not options for some of that without spending tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. So the need for that aviation for both the movement of people and goods, medicines, food supply, all those sort of things are really critical. So we're focusing on how do we cut those Scope 3 emissions with our airline partners and partners that folks on the phone today, both on the demand and supply side. So we see the future having to have supply on airport, whether it's produced on airport or transported and stored on airport or close to the airport, is really critical because a lot of cost in hydrogen comes to the transport side. And very similar, we're focused on safety and security. I'll call it a little bit colorblind when it comes to hydrogen. Really what we're focused on is the carbon intensity of hydrogen, because not everywhere in the world is going to be able to produce green hydrogen at the same scale that you can maybe somewhere you have hydroelectric everywhere. So in our case, our energy grid's different, but we are building the world's largest solar farm in an airport to be able to produce green hydrogen with electrolysis, but that's going to happen in phase 2. Our first phase will be blue hydrogen with carbon capture, first direct inject and then CCUS. So I think overall, collectively, airports are really well positioned, and it's really critical that we all work on this collectively, and co-opetition is a good thing, cooperation and competition, because a plane wants to take off and land somewhere different. Today it's minus 23 here Celsius. I don't want to take off and land back here. I want to go somewhere warm. So or maybe colder if you head north. So I think that the more we can do collectively as a region and our regions and airports and community together, I think is important. So thank you for the opportunity today.
Thanks, Myron. This is an absolutely fantastic discussion around sectoral coupling and indeed the importance of low carbon hydrogen rather than the various colours. Maybe let me wrap up with Brian. Coming closer to home in Scotland, Brian, I wonder whether you could give a few words around the innovation and the appetite at AGS in Glasgow specifically.
Yeah, thanks, Arnab, and good evening, everyone. Yeah, very similar to the comments that Ahmad and Myron have made. You know, AGS, we operate Aberdeen, Glasgow, and Southampton airports. We're a regional airport group. In terms of scale, 2019, pre-COVID, we carried about 13 million passengers. So about half of those passengers were flying on domestic routes. So we've got about 140 services across our airports. Probably about 50 of them are domestic. And why is that important? Well, to the point Myron made, that sector link will be the perfect test bed when it comes to trialing hydrogen flight. You know, if I take Glasgow, it's where I'm based. It's the largest airport of the three. We've got everything from the Twin Otter, which operates from Glasgow up to the beach in Barra, to the A380. So we all know there's no silver bullet when it comes to decarbonising aviation. You know, we're going to have to modernise our airspace. We're going to have to scale up production of SAF, but also accelerate research and development of the hydrogen. And then what does that mean then for an airport operator? Well, it means that we need to embrace and invest in all solutions. I think the challenge there when you're coming out of 2 years of no business and being locked down because of COVID is that, you know, investment crunch, which is something that ACI Europe's Chief Executive Olivier Jankovic has referred to. You know, airports were now having to invest in our regrowth and rebuilding after COVID, but we're also having to invest in you know, that journey to net zero. So a big part of our work at the moment is trying to understand what's going to go first. You know, we get into that VHS versus Betamax debate around hydrogen electric, but we're going to have to accommodate everything. And what we're now trying to understand is which of our airline partners are going to look at hydrogen and what do we need to do to accommodate that. And obviously we're now working with yourselves, Arnab, at ZeroAvia on a project over the next 2 years to answer a lot of the questions we'll probably touch on now around you know, refueling, storage, turnaround times, etc. So yeah, it's quite an exciting time for us.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's a great segue, and I'm going to keep us honest to time. So let me address, we have a list of questions that were discussed, but let me maybe just pick 2 or 3 so we can get into that and then open the floor to questions in about 10, 15 minutes or so. So maybe exactly to your point, Brian, and I'll address this to you first, but please everyone else, then let's go around the room. What are the infrastructure models that you are seeing in order to deliver low carbon fuel? And how are you thinking through the complexity of the broader energy transition in the power and hydrogen markets that feeds into those models? How are you thinking through that?
Yeah, so we do have a lot of questions, and I'm trying to work with my colleagues in the airfield teams and engineering on how we address those. I suppose I think if we look at you scale, certainly we're either going to have to tanker the stuff in, it gets piped in, or we generate hydrogen on site. I think initially we're looking at having it tankered in. That then leads on to the questions: where do we store it, and how do we get it to the aircraft? I think one of the things we're looking to do potentially over the next year is create a digital twin, where we can start plugging in a lot of scenarios and answering those. But I think for us, you know, particularly the refueling piece as well, you know, as a smaller airport, you know, size is you know, space is at a premium. And what does that mean then in terms of turnaround times, and how do we do that safely and manage that? Because ultimately we want this to enhance the experience for the passengers and for our airline partners. We want to make sure that we're not introducing something that's potentially going to reduce the turnaround times and their ability to get the most out of their fleet. But yeah, I think what we look to do certainly over the next year so is that digital twin piece, look at the storage, and most importantly, how we get it from wherever we store it over to the stands.
Thanks, Brian. That's a great answer. Maybe let me address this to one of the other panelists. Ahmad, maybe you could take that as well, because we have talked a lot in our partnership development around some of these models. Do you have anything to add that's different to Brian, or what's your thoughts?
I like the idea of Brian of the digital twin. We are actually also adopting something very similar. However, we are also looking into actually first doing and then moving to, well, let's say two parallel streams. One of them is doing, and the other one is basically the master planning for the future. How would it look like based on the demand? So the doing stream is basically working together with partners on different national and international projects to actually deliver hydrogen flights and storage on site by 2024, right? And the other one we are working on is basically looking in a parallel way to how is that going to fit based on different scenarios going forward to the future. Is this going to be, are we going to have enough space? Do we need to take any additional reservation? So as an airport, we work with a space reservations. We work with what we call master planning. And it's a very important exercise to basically make sure that we have the right spaces around airside, but at landside. Now, having said that, the things we are clearly looking at and strongly looking at are basically, as Brian said, trucking in and storing, and basically manufacturing on site. And one of the interesting things as well, and that came also as a chat question, is basically looking into whether we can tap into the gas backbone within the Netherlands specifically. And some research is going on as we speak about the feasibility of the gas backbone or the gas infrastructure for hydrogen, which is a second one. All these together is basically our projects and corporations, I would say co-creation, that we work on together with the partners on within a cross-sectoral cooperation, because we don't know everything and we need to cooperate on it, but also with other airports, because then you want to create that destination that Myron talked about. We need to go somewhere. We don't want to fly around and then land at the same spot. So, yeah.
A great answer, though. Thank you for that, Ahmad. Let me pull that thread then through as we see these different geographies operating, and maybe address the question first to Myron and then to Jesse to see the comparison on the airport side. And you're both operating in different geographies with very different regulatory environments, with different clean energy access that you've already alluded to, and different scopes for emission profiles. Can you touch on some of those unique factors and how they impact your approach? Maybe Myron, you could address that first.
Sure. No, thank you, Arnab. Yeah, I mean, I would, for our region, again, from a hydrogen perspective, where I say we're colorblind on hydrogen, each region is going to have to look at what's going to work for them for hydrogen. It's more important to get people onto hydrogen, reduce carbon intensity, and then focus on the carbon intensity of the hydrogen than it is on the color of the hydrogen, which there's a lot of I'll call it gamesmanship right now on having to be branded only green. But then I won't name the company, but there's a company that uses green hydrogen that they truck halfway across the United States. So it's not really green, right? It's going in a diesel truck, being transported, and then being put in something that look like a green hydrogen. So it's really about the carbon intensity. So for us regionally, I think every region is going to look at what's going to work for them and be able to democratize it to get into vehicles. Because whether that vehicle be a truck, a bus, a train, or because we've got locomotives running on hydrogen here in our region, but are also into airplanes is critical, because that mass production will bring the cost down. So I think for us, that's our number one focus, is how do we democratize it? Regulatory wise, our federal government is very keen on hydrogen, and it's very helpful that SAE's entered, as was talked about just earlier. SAE's putting on, as Jesse said, a airport group to actually come together and set the standards for it, because no one knows how to regulate it yet, at least in our environment, right? We find provincial regulation, federal regulation, and then airport regulation, and overall. So I think that's, the more we can work together collaboratively, I think the better outcome we'll have in that side. Of course, the number one we shared with our board and with everyone is safety and security is number one, right? We're not going to compromise that in any format. So we can assure people that they don't think of hydrogen the old way, but think of hydrogen as today.
That's a fantastic and really thoughtful response. And then we maybe make that link then straight into that regulatory space, Jesse, and great to get your thoughts sitting in Palm Springs, where, as we know, there's a lot of wind.
Okay, I'll start again. Yeah, there's a lot of wind and there's a lot of sun, as you can see. But United States is a different story, certainly from region to region, but really in California, I just want to focus, I guess, where we're again. Sorry about that. California has a lot of incentives. It's got, right now it looks like somewhere upwards of 13 billion just for zero emission vehicles and zero emission infrastructure. And they have, a lot of funding that they're trying to really motivate and get green hydrogen here as well. So there's a big incentive in California with a carbon trading effort that's called Low Carbon Fuel Standard, where the carbon sources paid sort of into this fund, and this fund goes back to those who are making either charging stations or hydrogen. So there's a big incentive on the fuel side. On top of that, there is a number of very positive national laws that add on top of that. There's a huge tax incentive from federal government in regards to the Inflation Reduction Act, and also there's funding coming for infrastructure in that regard. But hydrogen, so in California, just as an example today, price of hydrogen at a gas pump is about $20 a kilogram, which is a lot more because of natural gas prices, things like that. But the price is going to get a lot cheaper, at least here that we see, with these incentives. So in terms of turning which type of hydrogen, California really has a lot of incentives to make it green. We think that's really going to be a big push. And there is an opportunity to use grid power as well in some areas where it's lower priced. But there are tremendous, there are wind farms generating, and there's I think it's about 10 gigawatts of wind that's the government is putting together as well. For airports themselves, the big issue is how do you get all that energy for that price, a local price, to the airport in scale. And at a small airport, it's easier to scope without going at length. We said 60, 100 tons a day is within the technologies today, but that's a lot of power. So I think that there's a thought of having, depending on the size of the airport, different solutions. But I think the answer to your question, green and hydrogen is very subsidized at this moment. And I think that it's a good sign to get that market kicked off. Certainly, however, 95% or more of the hydrogen in the near term is going to be SMR, but we see the trend shifting dramatically over the next few years.
Thanks, Jesse. This is a great answer in a part of the world which has been driving the hydrogen transition for a long time, not least with the original hydrogen highways from Schwarzenegger, etc. Let me ask one more question before opening it up to the audience, and maybe this is for everybody in the room. And let me start with Brian again. I mean, what do you see as the business opportunities for airports in this energy transition, in this hydrogen transition? And what are the business model innovations that we are seeing? How will that affect the customer, if at all?
Opportunities probably goes back to Jesse's cookbook that he took us through at the start. I mean, it's that phrase we've all been using, airports as an energy hub. You look at an airport and you look at the businesses that are, attracted and invest in the surrounding area. We are just one of a number of major employers on the site. We've got big major logistic companies as well. So yes, you won't be surprised to hear that we're looking as well, but like Ahmad, at how we could, generate hydrogen on site. At Glasgow, we're going through the planning process at the moment for a 15 megawatt solar farm. That'll give us more than enough electricity that we need to be able to supply to neighbouring businesses and communities potentially, and also longer term, it gives us that opportunity potentially to generate hydrogen on site. So there is that real demand, and it seems that all the airports are now starting to look at this energy hub model, and that's something certainly AGS is hoping to deliver.
Thanks, Brian. And maybe Myron, to yourself, how do you see the business model innovations happening in the EIA group?
Yeah, I appreciate it. I would echo what Brian said earlier. We're just mentioned that we will have supply on site. We will have production of hydrogen on site at the airport, both blue and green hydrogen. The timing is to be determined. Where our engineering work is completed actually in that regard. And I think the model for us, we don't have the capital wherewithal, nor do we have the expertise to run hydrogen production. So we are partnering with the private sector. You'll see P3 partnerships, private sector partnerships, cross industries partnerships. And we're working on one right now with someone I hopefully will announce in the next couple of weeks. But I think it's really important to have the industry come together, because it's so integrated, right? Ground transportation, airframe manufacture, propulsion like ZeroAvia, propulsion you guys are doing, which is world class. I think it's really important to partner together to do this, because we're all going to learn together, right? So it's that co-opetition thing again, right? I mean, I want the plane to leave here and land in Glasgow or land in Rotterdam. I don't want it to come back here unless it's already picked up passengers and cargo. So.
Yeah, that's a great response, and I think certainly this orchestration at this early stage, as the market matures, is absolutely critical, because this expertise is difficult to accumulate in a single part of the overall ecosystem. Maybe Ahmad, to yourself, I mean, you've mentioned this already in the way that you're collaborating. And where do you see the future go in terms of the business model opportunities here?
Well, in our region, you notice that there is a huge, when I mean our region, I mean the Rotterdam region, where we have the port of Rotterdam, which is one of the oldest and largest ports in Europe. We see that most of the companies, energy companies, but also the port themselves, are investing in the infrastructure towards a future with hydrogen. So basically talking about bringing in green hydrogen, gray hydrogen, also pink hydrogen around here. So a bit of diversity of hydrogen, as Myron mentioned. From a business model perspective, I expect basically to have a similar model to what we have now, but then that will be built on the economic wheel of the hydrogen. So once the hydrogen economy picks up, the wheel will be eventually turning, and then we will be coming to a place where hydrogen is basically our energy transporter. And once we get there, with our current shift in energy production towards sustainable energy, which has eventually ups and downs, I would expect and see it logical to use airports as a buffer. I wouldn't see the airport being able to satisfy its hydrogen capacity. I don't see that coming in the future, but I see it definitely as a point of balancing the demand and as a point where you can actually optimize on the economics.
Thanks, Ahmed. It's very interesting, different examples of sectoral coupling, of balancing power, and indeed multimodality across those three airports. Let me leave the final word with Jesse before handing off to Dominic. Jesse, what are you seeing? You've moved from the OEM side to the infrastructure side. How do you see your business model bringing value in this transition?
Yeah, so thank you for that. Yeah, so what I really see, I want to mention, echo one thing that Ahmad mentioned about scale. You know, I think that what we see is, we said the price of hydrogen today is very high. We see hydrogen price coming down, and in terms of a business model, near term, we see a smaller station developing with sector coupling. You know, so having a fleet of trucks coming in and attached to a hydrogen station, that sort of thing, sector coupling to get the ground transportation engaged in that station. And the same thing, it has to be a coordination with the hydrogen aircraft on board in terms of that scale. And if that's a coordinated effort, then you can plan ahead and really get the cost of hydrogen lower than the cost of jet fuel today. You know, so I think that's something that really needs to be understood, and at that scale. So we see certainly there's a lot of subsidies to get there, at least in California, but there's a lot of investment. And what investment likes to see is, you know, supply and demand and a coordinated effort. That's something where you know, a public-private partnership in the beginning would be very beneficial to help kick things off in certain areas. Yeah.
Thank you. I think two key points that come out there. One is scale, and the other one is actually what the target cost can look like, which is very heartening and is very important to hear. I'm conscious of time, so Dom, may I hand off to you for the Q&A? Because I can see there's lots of interest here.
Thanks, Arnab. We'll just spend a couple of seconds. I did recognise that Ahmed had his hand up and he wanted maybe to say something. So, Ahmed, do you want to close up on that last point from Jesse?
Yeah, so I just wanted to make one comment. That's basically, so as we mentioned about scaling up and the future hydrogen economy. So eventually the aviation industry is not the only industry in the transportation and in the energy that will be looking into hydrogen. And therefore that, you know, interaction, how the mobility sector will look into it, how policies will work on this, and how the cross-sectoral cooperation will end up, would have also a lot of, let's say, an important role in shaping how our business model will look like.
Superb. So let's go to a quick question that was posed to you, Ahmed, but I think it'd be relevant for everybody to ask it, to answer it, is how much land have you reserved today for hydrogen production and storage in the future? A little bit of a future-gazing question, but we
are currently working on the exercise. We have not reserved it yet. We are currently working on the exercise, but it could really, if we're talking about a small airport or a big, more sizable airport like a hub airport, the difference can be huge, and we're talking really about a lot of land that is required.
Myron, I think you also wanted to jump on that one.
Yeah, I'll include our solar farm because we oversized the solar farm with our partners intentionally to be able to produce green hydrogen. We're at about 350 hectares. The solar farm itself is about 290 hectares of that, of land in our overall. We're just updating our master plan now.
Terrific. Again, there's a couple of questions here which are in a similar vein. So one is Bill Leahy asks, should the aviation industry now urge oil and gas majors and other private enterprises in the area and a number of other players to begin thinking about gaseous hydrogen pipeline infrastructure? And I know, for example, Bayes in the UK just had a consultation looking at hydrogen transportation and storage infrastructure. And then there's also questions here a little bit around, okay, what's the best model? Is it production on site? So I know we've kind of covered some of this ground, but would you give any final thoughts on whether you think nationwide pipeline infrastructure versus localized production, which is the best methodology here, or is it going to be a mix?
Yeah, if I could interject just some global perspective first, because there are three types of airports, small, medium, large, I guess you'd say. Large one being like a Heathrow and LAX, and a small one being Long Beach or regional. And then the medium being like a Manchester or an Oakland, Sacramento, right? And if you talk about scale, you're asking a big question. You ask for acreage and things like that, but the big question is how much hydrogen do you need? So a small airport may need 100 to 200 tons a day, and the large airport, according to the Fly Zero report, is somewhere between 1,400 and 1,800 tons a day. So, in terms of that question, I think that's why we're starting with a small airport first, because, 60 tons a day is more palatable and understandable. That is how things need to work. But eventually, pipelines will play a key role. But there are three different types in our paper that mirrors what's going on in Fly Zero. First one is you can ship it in the beginning, which is fine if you start 8 or 10 tons, right? But if you talk about shipping that in terms of liquid for a 60 ton a day, that's 14 trucks a day, okay? Whereas, London Heathrow, if you want to ship that in, that is 450 trucks a day of liquid hydrogen. So eventually, the concept of you need to size it correctly, your question. I think that there will be, for smaller airports, opportunities, absolutely, to create some on-site, and then maybe even have some kind of shipment. But eventually, as you scale, I think you're going to realize that you're going to need to have probably a liquefaction on site. But like I said, there's no silver bullet in this white paper that was developed, and in fact. But it's really important to understand that the question, most definitely pipelines are in wherever you are, probably Europe more so with the backbone, right? But in the US as well, there is Southern California, there is a big push to having a large hub with pipelines. But every time we say the word pipeline, at least in the US, think 6 to 10 years.
Yeah.
So anyways.
So I mean, we've had heard a lot from Brian, Ahmad, and Myron about the specific plans for localized production on site and looking at that. I mean, do you have a view a little bit in terms of how much in the future you might draw from a centralized production location versus what you think the airport can produce on site to manage operations?
I'm happy to start that, Don. I think initially for us, all of our hydrogen is coming off site. And we actually have our first hydrogen vehicle arrived here in July, our dual fuel hydrogen diesel vehicle. And that hydrogen is all coming from local production. Our community is out right now for 62 gas stations to RFP for putting in a whole network of refueling stations. But that hydrogen is being centrally produced about 30 kilometers from the airport. So I think in our case, because of where we are geographically, we have such large hydrogen production, we have the ability to do a mix of on-site and have local, reliable, close supply. But that'll be, as Jesse said, I think it's going to be different in every market. So for us, we'll end up with a hybrid model between the two. And we have the land in order to do a lot of hydrogen production, particularly when we get to green hydrogen. But I think we'll be somewhere like, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but we'll have a mix. But it'll differ based on if I can't speak for other airports, but some of the airports in the US, they don't have a lot of land, right? I mean, Denver and others do, but if you're Long Beach, you're pretty constrained, right? So how do you produce?
So any of the, Brian, Ahmad, any closing remarks? We've got a lot of other questions in here, particularly looking at SMR, small modular reactors for nuclear. I don't think we've got time to necessarily get into the whole nuclear question, but a reminder that we'll try to answer as many of the FAQs as we can after the fact and post updates and send those to all the registrants. But Brian, Ahmad, any other closing remarks on the point Myron's just made or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind going. I mean, I think it's back to Jesse's point, and it's understanding when the demand's going to come, and it's going to be different for different airports. Even you look at AGS, Glasgow, best part 10 million passengers a year, Aberdeen maybe 2, and less than 1 million at Southampton, which is very different demands even within our own group. If you take Glasgow, we probably, 300,000 litres of jet fuel a day, depending on the time of year. Great piece of work by Sophie Lane's group, ATI, sort of thinking that maybe by 2035, an airport of Glasgow size, we probably need 100,000 litres of liquid hydrogen a day. So that gives us a good base to start working with. How do we get it? Do we tanker it in? But I do think it's going to head towards a hybrid model, as Myron has said, liquefaction. And then you start, it's not just probably going to be solely used for the airport. We're going to be looking at that energy hub model and supplying to neighbours off-site.
Perfect. Ahmed? All good. Okay, splendid. Thanks so much for sticking around on this panel, and particularly for an extra few minutes. It allowed us to get through everything we wanted to. So thanks to Brian, Ahmed, Myron and Jesse, and Arnab as well for hosting that. Just going to give a quick summary, and then I'm going to hand over to Val Miftakhov, our CEO and founder, just for some closing remarks, and then we'll play a video. As mentioned, we have the floor platform for networking and talking to various members of our team. So if you want to dive into that platform after this conference closes, we'll still be open for another hour or so, and able to answer any questions and connect there. And also you've got the opportunity to network with some of the peers who've also been listening in on the content today. Brilliant, another brilliant day, really interesting stuff. You get the video recordings will be posted to our YouTube and also sent out for any portions that you missed. We started with Jill Blickstein, VP Sustainability at American Airlines, committing to this transition because, not because we have the solutions, she said, but because we don't have the solutions, and the importance of realizing that really the industry needs to drive a lot of this, but the governments are acting to help. And that's been a marked difference and been observed in the US in particular over the last year or so with some big policy announcements. It was interesting to hear Jill's thoughts on non-CO2 emissions and how they're looking at strategies for contrail avoidance and how else we might be able to mitigate those non-CO2 emissions with things like hydrogen, particularly fuel cell. So brilliant to have Jill along and get that perspective from one of the world's largest airlines. Great stuff as well on our aircraft integration panel. We talked about the safe steps required in a progressive manner, moving from one thing to the next, not trying to make big leaps. And then we talked about the testing fundamentals that are crucial, and the real importance of demonstration, and the need to get big demonstrations to drive progress. We talked about how learning can come from failure as much as it can come from success. And about how combining established airframes with new propulsion tech can be powerful. You know, looking at that mature platform combined with the innovative technology, and that's the real path to limiting uncertainties in new testing applications. So really fascinating panel there, and also looking at some of the requirements for keeping aircraft in the air when they have these new technologies on board. We also looked at R&D and commercialization in the second panel of the day. There's never been a time to be in aerospace that's been so exciting, said Katie Milne as she opened it up, which was a great observation, and should be good for any kind of young people coming in the industry to reflect on that. We talked about how it's necessary to have deep pockets, and obviously a tough time for public finances across many different countries at the moment. But how we've seen that investment from the public purse, de-risking from investors, not just in terms of financially, but being that big check mark that this has been well analysed technology, and in a risk averse area like aerospace and aviation, that's obviously key. And then finally, we closed off with our infrastructure panel, where we heard a lot about how it's really horses for courses, and we are going to see different models develop with a number of different variables across different airport locations. We examined like the right production pathways. We also looked a little bit at whether you're going to have centralized or localized production infrastructure and renewable energy demand. Loads more questions than we could get to as we experienced yesterday. So I do want to reiterate that we'll make every effort to answer those and email those out to participants and registrants. But with that, fantastic couple of days. Thanks everyone for their time. I want to hand over to Val for our closing remarks. Thanks, Val.
Thank you, Dom. Yeah, really great 2 days, and really excited about what the future holds for us. I think if there is one takeaway that I take from these 2 days and all the panels, is that it's not just takes the village to do this; it takes the city to do what we're all trying to do. And it's really great to see that city coming together with the entire ecosystem. So power plants, manufacturers, aircraft manufacturers, airports, infrastructure players, airlines, operators, cargo operators. It's so great to see everybody aligning around this vision of future clean aviation. And we're so fortunate at ZeroAvia to be one of the leading forces there. And again, reflecting on the last 5 years since starting the company, the world has changed dramatically. The industry has changed dramatically. The way governments look at it changed dramatically. And it's really, really exciting time for the industry to be in right now. So with that, thank you everybody who participated in this. We really appreciate everybody's input. We'll get to everybody's questions, and we'll post all the content on our event sites alongside with the answers to the questions. And also the previous summits that we held over the last couple of years are also available. The content is available on our site, so you can see some historical perspective. And with that, we're looking forward to the next 12 months of great progress on the technology, on ecosystem build-outs, on flight testing. Of course, very exciting time for the industry here. And with that, thanks everybody. And see you again next year.